All right, welcome back to the Daily Read Aloud, The Wild Robot. When we left off yesterday, we left at a very exciting point. All right, so someone quickly tell me who came to the island in the ships and what is their function? What are they supposed to do? Emma?
They're robots that are trying to take Roz away from the island.
Yes, so their job is to take Roz back. They have collected all the other robots that sank in that hurricane except for Roz and the robot graveyard. So they got all of those. Now, why is it not going to be easy for them to take Roz back? Cadence?
Because she keeps on asking all these questions.
Okay, so she was asking lots of questions, and they just said, no questions, no questions. Josiah?
The geese flock came in.
The geese flock came. They basically, wrapped around the faces of the robots, and Bright Bill said, run, Mama, run. All right, so any predictions? What might happen here on this island? Quentin?
There's also one more thing. It's not really a prediction, but they're also going to try to turn him off.
Okay, so we think they might try to turn the robot off. Madeline?
I think one of the things, or they're gonna be new to the island too, and they might live there.
Okay, you think the Rico robots might live there with Roz and the other animals? Okay, Liam?
Is the chapter called The War?
It's called The Hunt Begins.
Because I was like, if it's called The War, there might be like a...
Could be. Emma?
I hope that Roz goes and gets the bears to take their limbs off.
Okay, so maybe she'll get other animals to help her. They probably all owe her a lot of favors. Eric?
So, Brightville collected every single animal on the island, and they're attacking them, and then Ross ran to the grizzly bears, and then the mother bear went out, and then her cubs guarded her.
Okay, could be. So we have a lot of predictions that animals might come to help her. Last thing, Josiah?
Never mind, no spoilers.
Okay, yeah, no spoilers. All right. So chapter 70 on page 230 is called The Hunt Begins. While his flock distracted the Ricos, Bright Bill darted around them and desperately searched for buttons. He had once shut down his own mother with a click, and now he would do the same thing to the intruders. But he found no buttons on these robots, only smooth surfaces. Clearly, the Ricos were not designed to be shut down so easily. Giant hands swung through the air, and the geese were swatted away. Loudwing was plucked by her foot and flung to the ground. She crawled into the weeds as the others scrambled up and over the trees. A quick scan by the robots revealed that Roz was gone. The three Ricos turned and marched back to the airship. The door hummed open, and the robots disappeared inside. And when they stepped back into the meadow, each was holding a silver rifle in his hands. The hunt for Roz was on. Without speaking, the Ricos marched away from one another, fanning out in their standard search pattern. Rico 1 marched straight toward the southern tip of the island. Rico 2 marched straight up the mountainside. And Rico 3 marched straight into the forest. Chapter 71, The Forest Assault. Shh, girls. Rico 3 marched through the forest with steady, stomping strides. His blocky head swiveled from side to side, scanning for any sign of Roz. But he was distracted. You see, everywhere the Rico went, he was met by shrieking animals. He didn't know it, but he was in the midst of a coordinated assault. Swooper, which is our owl, hooted orders from above. Hawks, sparrows, owls, dive in front of his eyes. Fink, which is the fox, barked orders from below. Hares, weasels, foxes, dash between his legs. The forest was seething with an army of wild animals, distracting the robot, luring the terrible thing deeper into their trap. Chit-Chat leaped out from the branches and clawed at the robot's eyes, yelling, "Anyone who shows up on our island and tries to take my friend's mother away has a big problem with me." Then she leaped back into the branches. The robot pointed his rifle at the squirrel and pulled the trigger. A blazing beam of light shot through the forest and sent tree limbs crashing to the ground. It grazed poor Chit-Chat, singeing the end of her tail, but she ignored the pain and scurried up to the safety of the canopy. With each stride, the ground grew a little softer, and the robot sank a little deeper, until he was up to his waist in thick, heavy muck. His churning legs slowed to a stop, and he stood there computing whether to move forward or backwards. Rico 3 was now an easy target. "Begin the bombardment," ordered Swooper. The sky darkened as a swarm of birds descended from the treetops. They swooped past the robot and splattered his face with their droppings. Bird after bird swooped and splattered, and the Rico's eyes were instantly caked in filth. "Don't let up," screeched the owl. "Give it everything you've got." There seemed to be an endless stream of birds with an endless amount of droppings. Rico 3 let go of his weapon and wiped his filthy face with both hands. That was the moment the fuzzy bandits had been waiting for. They dashed out from the weeds, snatched the rifle with their nimble hands, and dragged it away. Tawny and Crown Point looked on from the underbrush. The buck lowered his head, and the raccoons placed the rifle upon his antlers. Then the deer and the raccoons slipped into the shadows. By the time Rico 3 realized his weapon was missing, it was too late. He let out a sad electronic tone, and then, as the birds continued their bombardment, the robot turned and blindly trudged back through the muck. It was now time for the final stage of the plan. Broadfoot, the bull moose, emerged from the trees and stood directly in the path of the blinded robot. Rico 3 had no idea that his every step brought him closer to the mighty animal. All right, now when you're picturing a moose, I need you to picture the largest, I think it is the largest in terms of tallness, animal in our northern hemisphere. Okay, a bull moose is huge. Its antlers, if it was standing in the room, could almost be up to the ceiling.
What?
I have seen them out west. They are large, okay? So make sure you've got that visual as we read on. When the robot was in range, Broadfoot turned and kicked back with his powerful hind legs. There was a sharp crack, and dung sprayed from the Rico's head. The moose kicked again, crack, and the robot's head flopped to one side. A tear in his neck exposed a tangle of silver tubes, but Rico 3's legs kept pumping, so Broadfoot kept kicking. He pounded the robot's head in with his heavy hooves, denting and crushing it into an ugly shape, and with one final crack, the head broke loose, soared through the air, and squelched into the muck. The headless robot fizzled and smoked, his legs ground to a halt, and he never moved again. Liam.
What if the ugly shape is this?
Well, just imagine how ugly. Eric. The robot, Rico 3. Shh. All right, don't talk out. All right. Chapter 72, The Mountain Rumble. Abby. Okay, shh, we're moving on. Shh. All right, Chapter 72, The Mountain Rumble. Rico 2 stood at the mouth of the cave. "Rosum Unit 7134, are you in there?" The only response was his own flat voice echoing back. But he sensed movement somewhere down the tunnel. So he switched on his headlights, raised his rifle, and marched inside. The Rico marched past animal bones and rock piles and wide cracks in the walls. His blocky head swiveled from side to side, scanning for any sign of Roz. But she was nowhere to be found. So he turned and marched back toward daylight. And then a deafening roar filled the cave. From the shadows flew a giant body. Mother Bear charged into the robot and smashed him against a wall. Then Nettle and Thorn jumped in, and together the family went to work. They rammed his legs. They slashed his chest. They muscled him to the ground. On his way down, Rico 2 squeezed the trigger. There was a flash of blazing light, and the walls began to crumble. Nettle grabbed her brother by the scruff and pulled him outside as an avalanche of rock thundered behind them. Mother Bear howled. The rifle exploded. Stones clanged against Rico 2. The avalanche slowed and settled as a cloud of dust billowed out of the cave. "Mother?" Nettle peered into the darkness. "I'm here," said a weak voice. The young bears dashed inside and found their mother half buried. They pulled heavy stones from her body and dusted her off. "I have broken bones," she rasped, "but they will heal. Where is the robot?" Rico 2's headlights switched back on. Stones tumbled as the robot staggered to his feet. His body was scratched and scraped. His head was badly dented. His left arm was completely useless, so thwip, it was tossed aside. Then the one-armed robot limped out of the cave and continued the hunt for Roz. "Don't worry about me," Mother Bear growled to Nettle and Thorn. "Kill the robot." With his heavy limp and his grinding gears, Rico too was easy to track. The young bears caught up with him as he was entering a grove of pines. But they didn't attack, not yet. There was a better place to finish him off up ahead. So they hung back and followed him across the mountainside. The distant rumble of the waterfall grew louder with each passing minute, and then a slash of white appeared through the trees. Soon, the robot was standing beside the roiling, frothing river just above the falls. He was too badly damaged to leap over the falls or to wade through the rapids or to climb down the cliffs. But he had to continue his hunt for the target. So he started limping upriver in search of a safer crossing. There was a rustling, and the young bears exploded out from the trees. They threw their heavy shoulders against the robot's body, and he stumbled sideways into the riverbank. Nettle reared up and wrestled the robot, twisting and shaking him with all of her strength. Rico, too, felt his feet slipping on the rocks. He felt his body tipping over, and then he plunged into the white water, and he brought Nettle with him. The current immediately swept Nettle toward the falls. She rolled through the rapids, crashed into one rock, and then desperately clambered onto another. Rico, too, stood straight up, and the river rushed around him. He took a step, slipped, and disappeared beneath the water. But then he was up again. Thorn ran to help his sister, but she was pointing upriver and roaring, "Use the logs!" When the younger bear turned around, he saw what she meant. A jumble of broken logs were wedged between the rocks of the rapids, and a moment later, Thorn was on top of them. With water sloshing over his back, he forced a paw between the logs and pried the top one loose. It splashed into the river and wound its way down through the rapids, only to roll harmlessly past the robot. Then it dropped out of sight. The bear tried again. He popped another log into the river, and this one spun just in time to ram its full weight into the robot's chest. Rico, too, went sailing backward and sank beneath the surface. When he reappeared, the river was full of heavy wooden torpedoes. One log pounded the robot's shoulder. Another slammed his face. More logs knocked him closer and closer to the falls. The current became too much for the injured robot, and it carried him away. He grasped for anything solid he could cling to, but the rocks were too slippery. So he settled for a fistful of fur. Nettle had been hanging onto one rock this whole time, but now that the robot was pulling her, she started losing her grip. She couldn't hang on much longer. Finally, she cried out, "I'm sorry, Thorn," and she let go. Nettle and Rico, too, surged toward the rumbling falls. The bear felt the robot release his grip. She watched him glide over the edge. Then she closed her eyes and waited for the end to come. But it was not Nettle's time. Reader, what happened next is hard to believe. You see, the river didn't fall away beneath Nettle. It tightened around her. Hundreds of fish surrounded the bear. They pressed their faces into her fur. They thrashed their tails against the current, and they slowly pushed her away from the edge. Farther and farther they went, gradually moving upriver, until Nettle's brother pulled her from the water. The bears collapsed onto the riverbank, and when they looked down, they saw hundreds of fish looking back up. "Thank you," roared Nettle. "I'll never eat fish again." The fish smiled and sank into the rapids. "I thought you were dead," said Thorn, breathing hard. All right, friends at home, there's the robot falling off the waterfall. It's not very detailed, so you can get the general idea here. Cadence?
I know who the fish were.
Who could they have been?
I forgot his name.
Shh. Okay, so maybe they knew Rockmouth, right?
Yeah.
The big pike Roz helped? All right, so he said, "I thought you were dead." "So did I," Nettle laughed. "Looks like you're stuck with me a while longer, little brother." "I'm not little." It felt good to joke, but the bears quickly turned serious. They were both bruised and bleeding, and their mother was in far worse condition. However, it would all be worthwhile if Rico, too, had finally been killed. The bears crept to the edge of the cliff, and there, at the bottom of the waterfall, strewn across the wet rocks, was the shattered body of the dead robot. 2 down, 1 to go. Chapter 73, The Chase. Rico 1 was standing in the great meadow. He stared up at the smoking hill of ash and then down at the stampede of footprints around it. There had been a large bonfire with hundreds of animals and one robot. But why? The Rico couldn't make sense of what he was seeing. After thoroughly exploring the site, he continued through the meadow and into the forest. It was around that time that he lost communication with Rico 3, then Rico 2, and he knew that his partners had both been destroyed. Rico 1 would have to hunt down the target by himself. The hunter marched on. His blocky head swiveled from side to side, scanning for any sign of Roz. He was soon gazing across a glassy surface of a beaver pond. On the far side, a thread of smoke drifted up from another of one of those wooden domes. With his powerful legs, the robot launched himself up through the air, soaring in a high, graceful arc over the pond and down to the other side. His heavy feet slammed into the ground, leaving deep craters in the garden by the dome. He hunched over and looked inside. Fur and feathers and the dying coals of a fire, but the target wasn't in there. The Rico stood perfectly still and watched as a soft rain started dripping down through the tiers of the forest. And then he sensed it. Up in the canopy was something that didn't belong. Roz had been spotted. The hunter watched his target drop from branch to branch down to the forest floor. Then she bounded away through the thickly tangled underbrush without stirring a leaf, without snapping a twig, and vanished into the green. However, Rico 1 had other means of tracking her. He could sense her electronic signal. The signal was gliding around the edge of the pond, but it was fading fast. A few more seconds and he would lose it entirely. Rico 1 burst into a sprint. The forest seemed to sway and quake from his stomping strides. And a minute later, the forest really did begin to move. Trees were toppling down onto the Rico. He fired his rifle, and 2 toppling trees turned to ash. But then a third swung down through the smoke and hammered his body into the ground. Rico 1 shoved the tree aside, pulled himself up, and continued the hunt. He didn't notice the beavers diving back into the pond. Rico 1 tore through brambles and leaped over boulders, and suddenly the ground was caving beneath him. Down he fell into a deep pit, crashing against the bottom and twisting his leg. The robot violently pounded his leg back into shape. Then he launched himself up and out of the pit. He didn't notice the groundhogs watching from their tunnels. The hunter faced one trap after another. He was pelted with flaming pine cones and tripped by taunt vines and crunched by tumbling rocks. The hunter now limped and rattled and was covered in scars, but he kept going. Roz galloped back and forth across the island, again and again, as she tried to lose Rico 1. But no matter how fast she ran, or how well she hid, or how many animals helped, she couldn't escape the sound of the hunter's stomping footsteps. She had never run so hard for so long, and while her mechanical body was holding up, her wooden foot was not. After hours of relentless pounding, it finally gave out. She was galloping through the rocky forest by the sea cliffs when her foot splintered apart. As soon as Rico 1 found the fresh wooden splinters, he knew his target was in trouble. He stomped out from the trees onto the clifftop and scanned the coastline below. Geese were flying down through the drizzle. Otters were wriggling over the rocks. Seaweed and driftwood and broken robot parts were scattered about the shore. But the hunter also sensed a faint electronic signal. Roz was down there somewhere. The hunter's blocky hand clamped onto the clifftop and then thwip, it detached. The hand was connected to a strong cable that spooled out from the end of his arm. He gave the cable 2 quick tugs and he stepped off the ledge. Rico 1 zipped down the cliffside. One arm released cable, the other clutching his rifle, and he slowed to a gentle stop just as he reached the ground. Then, high above, the robot's hand unclamped and followed the cable all the way down until, whoop, it snapped right back onto the end of his arm. Geese squawked and otters squeaked as Rico 1 marched through the robot gravesite. The place was littered with torsos and limbs and heads. They were all valuable parts, but he would collect them later. For now, his only concern was finding Roz. He followed the electronic signal over to a clump of seaweed. But where was his target? Was Rico 1's sensor malfunctioning? The robot tapped his head a few times, but the mysterious signal remained. He looked around for any signs of her. And as he did, the clump of seaweed reached up and grasped his rifle. All right, now what was Roz doing on the beach? Josiah?
Camouflage.
Camouflage. Remember, she'd go around the island doing that. All right. Chapter 74. We'll try to get 1 or 2 more chapters read today. This one is called The Click. 4 robot hands were clamped around the rifle. Rico 1 loomed above. Roz lay below, camouflaged in seaweed. For a moment, all was still. And then the hunter swiftly lurched and twisted as he tried to rip the rifle away from his target. But Roz held on. Seaweed fell from her body as she was lifted right off the ground. Her legs dangled in the air until she pounded a foot and a stump against the hunter's broad chest, leaned back, and pulled on the rifle with all her strength. Waves crashed as the robots grappled for the weapon. But Roz was no match for Rico 1. The hunter was too big and too brutal. Roz could feel her body being pulled apart, but she could also feel the rifle being pulled apart. A faint glow appeared between her hands. The glow grew brighter and brighter, and then a blinding explosion launched the robots in opposite directions. When the smoke cleared, shards of the rifle were everywhere. Rico 1's body was poked with holes, and one arm was charred and crippled. Roz's arms and legs had been blown completely off. She was now just a torso and a head. Inside her computer brain, our robot's survival instincts were blaring. Her battered body simply could not take any more danger. Clearly, Roz was not designed for combat, but the Rico was. He pulled himself to his feet and hobbled toward his target. Roz wanted to get up and run away, but without arms and legs, our robot couldn't move. She could only speak. "Please, do not deactivate me," she said. Rico 1 ignored her. His blocky hand reached past her face and touched the back of her head. Click. All right, let me see how long this is. All right, I'll read 1 more chapter. Chapter 75, The Last Rifle. With the target deactivated, Rico 1 calmly moved on to the next phase of his mission. He limped through the grave site and began collecting every single robot part. He splashed into the shallows and returned with a foot. He shook the sand from a cracked torso. He pulled a hand from a tide pool. Sorry, that should have been head from a tide pool. Each part was then piled around Roz's lifeless body. Bright Bill watched in horror as his mother slowly disappeared under a pile of parts. Roz looked just like the dead robots, but she wasn't dead. She had simply been shut down. "Don't do it, Bright Bill." The flock tried to stop their leader. "It's too dangerous." But the goose was determined to bring his poor mother back to life. Bright Bill crouched low to the ground and slowly moved toward the pile of robots. And when Rico 1 limped away to collect another part, Bright Bill sprinted over the rocks, pushed past arms and legs, and squeezed into the pile. Click. A muffled voice echoed across the shore. "Hello, I am Roz Unit 7134, but you may call me Roz." Bright Bill hugged his mother's face as her computer brain rebooted. "Mama, wake up!" "What happened?" she said finally. "Where's the Rico?" "He's coming this way." "What were you thinking, Bright Bill? You must leave now before he kills us both." "I was scared, Mama," cried the goose. "I don't know what to do." Heavy footsteps stomped toward them. Robot parts were knocked aside. And then Rico 1 looked down with his glowing eyes. Bright Bill tried to squirm away, but thick fingers locked around him like a cage. "Mama, help!" cried Bright Bill as he was pulled up from the pile. "Please do not hurt my son," begged Roz. "He's harmless." Rico 1 paid no attention to Roz. He just held up the goose in his giant hand, ready to crush the life out of him. Mist swirled in the breeze. Waves sloshed against the rocks. Seagulls circled above. No, not seagulls. Vultures. And one of them clutched something silver in his talons. The vultures spiraled down, and Rico 3's rifle clattered onto the shore. Geese and otters quickly surrounded the rifle. They squawked and squeaked and fumbled with the weapon, trying to aim the clunky thing. The hunter was confused. How had those animals gotten a rifle? And how could they possibly know how to fire it? They did know. The geese had seen a trigger pressed before. All right, when had the geese seen this? Angie?
When their other leader got killed. They saw the gun and then they maybe watched how it clicked.
So they saw how the farmer used it, right? So they were smart enough to remember. A beam of light briefly flashed through the gloom. At first it seemed as if nothing had happened. But a moment later, Rico 1's chest began glowing a brilliant orange, and then it was melting and oozing down his front, and soon there was a wide gaping hole in the middle of his torso. His hand suddenly unclenched, and Brightville fluttered away. All right, now here's the picture of that, real quick to look.
I don't see it very good.
It's just a robot with a big hole in it. All right, shh. Back to quiet, please. Shh. Seawater sprayed over the gravesite, and steam hissed up from the Rico's scorching hot guts. He shook and twitched and collapsed beside Roz. Rico 1 turned his face to Roz and spoke in a quiet, garbled voice. More Ricos will come for you, and if you destroy them, still more will come. The makers will not rest until all missing robots have been retrieved. When? When will they come, said Roz. How long do we have? You can still be fixed, Roz. Go to the airship, but bring all the robot parts with you. The ship knows what to do. His voice went silent. His eyes went dark. Rico 1 was dead. All right, now, before he died, he said something very important. What did he say, and how does that affect our robot, Quentin?
More more robots will come, and that's going to affect him because it already took him a long time to get rid of a couple. So imagine how long it's going to take, like 4 or 5.
Right. And think about all the animals on the island. Did some of the animals get hurt throughout this process?
Yeah, the bears.
Okay. So that's something else to think about. Is it worth it for us to put everyone in danger?
No.
We know more and more robots will be coming. Emma?
He said to go to the ship because they know what to do.
Okay. So we also know that something at the ship would help Roz know what to do. Hayden?
The second book is called The Escape, so maybe it's like in the airship and she's trying to escape it.
Let's just focus on what we're reading now. Josiah?
I'm just gonna say one word, airship.
All right. Eric?
I think she's gonna go to the airship and or whatever the boat was or wherever the thing.
It's like a little airplane.
Yeah, and she or not she. It's rather she.
Mm-hmm.
She will go to the animals will hold her back to the park.
Okay.
And then she'll go over there, and then she'll try to get a rifle, and then kill all the robots.
So she can't fire the rifle, but the animals could, right? Remember, she's not allowed to hurt or harm anyone. That's why it's so hard for her to fight back against the robots. All right, last comment, Liam.
Maybe they are gonna get ready for to fight.
Okay, so maybe all the animals will be more prepared.
Is the last chapter called the fire, the war?
I don't know. All right, those of you at home, thanks for joining. See you tomorrow.